I get a lot of people asking about the camera equipment that I use and what do I actually do to keep it all going in the cold. So there's a few things to it. So I'll just run through a few of the basics right now. And just as a general disclaimer, pretty much everything I do will void your camera warranty. I'm filming in pretty extreme conditions, well outside the camera specs, and I'm using a lot of non-standard parts to keep the cameras working. So proceed at your own risk if you want to follow any of my advice. So to start off with, just have the regular old plain power cable. So I'm going to just pop this outside the back door for a second while I carry on talking. Right, you'll see why in a minute. So to power the cameras, big problem most cameras have is just the batteries freezing in the cold. So what happens is your normal internal battery is rated at about 7.5 volts. When it's fully charged, it might be up around 7.8 volts, depending on the specific camera in question. And when it gets down to about 6.8 volts, the camera thinks the battery's flat. So what happens is the battery freezes and the voltage drops on the battery and the camera thinks it's flat, so it shuts down. The way I get around that to supply the constant power supply is to use an old battery or a fake battery to put inside the camera, and I've done some wiring inside it there with one of these simple little DC to DC converters. You get these on eBay for a couple of dollars each, and this will take anything from about 40 volts right down to about 9 volts and be able to convert it to a 7.5 volt supply that the camera needs to keep going. So by using a 12 volt battery, it doesn't matter if the battery freezes a bit and the voltage drops down to say 11 volts, it's still going to be able to put out 7.5 volts through the converter, and that'll keep the camera happy and keep the camera going. Generally speaking, the electronics in the camera seem to be fine down to about -40 or so. Beyond that, it's a bit variable from one brand to another. I'll only bother with heating cameras or insulating them if the temperature is going to be below about -50 Celsius. Typically around about -60 you'll definitely start to strike some problems with shutters freezing, and just the physics of some of the electronics inside the camera can change and cause all sorts of weird things to happen. Typically I will use a 12 volt lead acid battery. It's because these are good down to -50 or so. They will keep operating a regular DSLR or video camera quite happily. The other type of battery I use quite a bit is a lithium-ion battery pack. So these in warm weather have slightly larger capacity than the heavier lead acid ones, but they're generally only reliable down to about -20 or so. You get down to about -30 and they get a little bit iffy. A lot of equipment these days will come with lithium polymer batteries like gimbal systems, and generally I found that the lithium polymer batteries are pretty horrible in the cold, and I try and avoid them wherever possible. So this is another example of things that don't really work too well in the cold. This is a handle I have for some of my camera gear, and with the plastic construction, the top support is just snapped apart and pretty much useless. So generally I will try and use things that are all metal construction, despite metal being horrible to hold on to in the cold. Another example is just some of the sports camera mounting plates, just little retainer clips snapping off because of things going brittle in the cold. And speaking of which, I'm just going to grab that power cable. So here's that cable, now nice and solid. And of course, trying to move this in the cold, you see it just snaps off. So trying to maintain a usable cable that's not going to short out in the cold is, depending on the type of plastic it's made from, can be quite difficult. So if possible, I'll generally try and find cables that are made of natural rubber. Natural rubber retains its elasticity down to good -40 or so. For motion control, Pretty much all the motion control systems that you can buy commercially will have rubber drive belts or plastic cogs and drive components. So I generally build all my own from scratch, mostly off-the-shelf parts and different configurations. So in this case, here we have just a little panning head that I can clip on top of a tripod, put the camera on top of that, and as you can see, it's all just solid metal gearing, direct drive straight off the motor. No extra parts, just nice and simple and rock solid. So it's just a straight DC motor, so the electronics are pretty simple, just a very basic speed controller. Simpler is better, basically, is what it boils down to. The more electronics and complicated stuff you put in there, the more likely you're going to have a failure. And of course, as most videographers will tell you, it pays to have a nice fluid head tripod in your kit so you can get those nice smooth panning shots. But the problem in Antarctica, of course, you hit the more extreme conditions and those nice fluids inside that fluid head tripod will freeze solid, and you're basically left with a brick on top of your tripod. So this is another area where a nice panning motor head will do wonders. So here's another example of this little portable dolly rig I made up. So this is CNC linear rails with a worm drive up the middle. So once again, it's all solid metal construction. I can stand on this and it just won't move a millimeter. It's all just rock solid. We've pretty much always got wind coming up here, so a lot of your commercial systems are nice and lightweight, but they'll just be constantly shaking the camera in the wind. So something like this that is absolutely rock solid, not going to move at all, it's pretty much essential to deal with the wind here. And then of course there's the cameras themselves, and I tend to break a lot of cameras. Every year I'll go through at least a couple of cameras, and here's one I've just destroyed this year. And if you might be able to see, I'm not sure, but down in there you can see the shutters pretty much fallen apart. It's a combination of things. One is just the sheer number of photos I take doing time-lapse sequences will wear out the shutter, but also in the extreme cold, the lubricants inside the camera basically turn to toffee and can really make things drag and wear out. This one lasted about 50,000 shutter activations, I think, which for the age of the camera is reasonably good for an older camera. Most of the modern cameras you expect maybe 200,000 to 600,000 sort of shots before they'll start to fall apart. There's a lot of cameras these days that have the electronic shutter option, so do a time lapse with electronic shutter and you're not going to wear out the shutter in the camera, so it's a pretty good option. And that's about it for now. For my next video in this series, I'll be talking about the specific cameras and lenses and tripod combinations that I've found that have worked well in the cold, and what to look for if you're wanting to buy a camera yourself, and a few more tricks and tips for photos and videos in the extreme cold. Hopefully some of this was actually entertaining or maybe even useful for you if you're planning a trip to cold places. Thanks for watching.